Edmonton, St. Albert.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's indeed an honor and a pleasure for me to continue my comments with respect to Bill C-304, an act to amend Section 13 of the Human Rights Code. Just to briefly sum up some of my observations the last time we spoke, I commented on that there are, well, firstly, the importance of freedom of speech and how freedom of speech is one of the fundamental concepts that we enjoy here in Western democracies such as Canada. But some of the members opposite talked about the limits of freedom of speech, and I acknowledge that they are there and that they are important. The torts of slander, libel, criminal prosecution for perjury, and of course the hate provisions of sections 318 to 320 of the Criminal Code, I believe adequately form a check and balance on free speech that crosses the line, especially 318 and 320, which talk about hate speech. But what Section 13 of the Human Rights Code purported to do was create a counterfeit right against hurt feelings, and the sponsor of this bill has talked about that not being a true right at some length. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to be concerned as legislators of mechanisms that are designed to protect liberty, which actually themselves become a threat to liberty. And in my view, that is what we have with respect to Section 13, which was intended to protect against hate speech on telephonic and electronically communicated messages, and by that we're really talking about the internet in the modern age, but which in and of itself has become a threat to free speech. And ironically, there are media reports today of a situation in Saudi Arabia where a 23-year-old blogger has been sentenced to death for comments that he blogged, partially on Twitter and in a blog, where he fancifully cited or described an imaginary relationship that he had with Muhammad. And he described Muhammad more as a friend to him than as a deity. And of course, that offended the clerics in Saudi Arabia, and this individual, for expressing those thoughts through his blog, has been sentenced to death. Now, of course, and thankfully, the sanctions under Section 13 of the Human Rights Code are much, much less tragic and severe than that which are imposed by the clerics in Saudi Arabia. But I think by analogy, members should be concerned that speech which some might find offensive is sanctionable. It is very much, Mr. Speaker, a difference of degree, not a difference of kind. This place, Parliament, where we have unfettered free speech and cannot be subject to prosecution, has to deal with difficult issues from time to time. And in fact, the last time this bill was before the House, almost at the exact same time, there was a court case in British Columbia where the criminal code provisions and sanctions against polygamy were under assault by an individual who had been charged with them. Now, the court in that case upheld the criminal code provisions banning polygamy in Canada, and in my view, rightfully so, but it might have gone differently. The point is, Mr. Speaker, that this chamber has to, from time to time, deal with contentious issues that people believe strongly, and they believe so because of their religion. Polygamy is an issue that some people subscribe to because of their faith. So if we're to have a fulsome debate on the definition of marriage, like this chamber had approximately 8 years ago, it is impossible to do so without perhaps offending people and their religious values. But we have protection in this place. But what about the outside world? As we all know, Mr. Speaker, the internet has become, and social media has become, the fluid marketplace of ideas where people talk and people comment, and everyone with a blog site suddenly becomes an amateur journalist and an editorialist. And almost all members of Parliament participate in these social media forums. I am on Twitter, I am on Facebook, and I think most members are. So these social media mechanisms have become important as we exchange ideas and gauge public opinion to things that we are debating in this House. So, Mr. Speaker, I think it is hypocritical for members of this House to not support this bill because Section 13 prevents bloggers and people on the internet from engaging in free speech because they could face prosecution simply because they offend somebody else's deeply held personal beliefs, such as freedom of religion. And I'm going to close, Mr. Speaker, with a quote from one of my favorite Prime Ministers, the 13th Prime Minister of Canada, John Diefenbaker. When he introduced the Bill of Rights, he said, "I am a Canadian free to speak without fear, free to worship in my own way, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose for what I believe wrong, free to choose those who shall govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold to myself and all mankind." A Canadian free to speak without fear. Certainly that freedom ought to be extended to people who communicate via the internet. I encourage all members to support Bill C-304 and repeal Section 13 of the Human Rights Code. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de